the trial is a fantastic trial, and in part, one reason that it was fantastic, and I mean that in a pejorative way, I guess you would say, is that it was the jury selection that was the most outrageous. The fact that there was no evidence and it was manufactured is another story, but the jury selection was just a complete, utter, talk about anarchy. It was literally, there was no connection to reality. The way that it worked is the judge selected a special bailiff and had this bailiff who sort of picked a jury pool. And in fact, he did pick a jury pool. He picked a jury pool of primarily businessmen and small entrepreneurs and professionals who pretty much said when they were interviewed that they couldn't be partial. And during the voir dire process, where the defense gets to deselect or expel people from being a potential juror, they get a certain number of those, which is part of the jury process. And what the prosecution did was they brought up the least reprehensible people at first, but the jury as jurors, and they would be considered unacceptable. So then the pool that was left was even worse. And we know this from the record. The transcripts exist today that you can read the interviews, the voir dire of the potential jurors, essentially saying, no, I cannot be impartial, and the judge saying, okay, you're on the jury. And that's essentially how the jury was composed of people who and that's why the governor of Illinois in 1893 said they should be pardoned. Primarily, he didn't even see the point of looking at the trial record, which in itself was quite devastating later on to the prosecution. And in fact, later on there are interviews of jurors who say, you know, that this was a terrible thing, this was unfortunate, I didn't feel I could speak up at the time, and so on. But the damage had been done, and after 3 months of a trial, they were easily convicted and sentenced to die. Appeals took place, and they were sentenced to die on all 7 of the 8 on November 11th of 1887. But the night before, the day before the hanging, 2 of them had their sentences commuted. That was Michael Schwab and Samuel Fielden. Oscar Neebe had received 15 years in prison for being part of this conspiracy, and then 5 others were sentenced to die by hanging. And Louis Ling, the youngest, a German carpenter, in fact, who allegedly made the bomb, died the night before in prison. Suicide or murder, we'll never know, but I would posit that he had a cigar smuggled in to him, and it had a dynamite cap in it. That's what blew away his face, that killed him. And it's hard to imagine that anybody would try to kill themselves that way. And I also believe that it was done by the police because it was a way to degrade the, no pun intended, the face of what an anarchist would be like, that they would be afraid to die by hanging and that they were just cowards. And I think that it was really, and that's what the newspapers tried to portray. When you look at the illustrations, it has him in the wrong position of the way that he actually died. He was laying down on his bed when he lit the cigar. They show him lighting it standing up. It's probably a fabrication that he killed himself, but again, we, just like the bomb thrower, it's probably unlikely we'll ever know who threw the bomb, how Louis Ling died. But the next day, November 12th is, that day, November 11th, is the hanging, and beautiful gold embossed invitations had been sent out to important people in the city to come witness the death of the labor movement. And the martyrs, the 4 of them, August Spies, George Fisher, George Engel, and Albert Parsons, marched to the gallows singing La Marseillaise, the song of the French Revolution. It inspired them. It was a very dramatic moment the night before. Words issued by Albert Parsons. He wrote, "If you think by hanging us you can stamp out the labor movement from which downtrodden millions, the millions who toil and want misery, expect salvation, If this is your opinion, then hang us. Here you will tread upon a spark, but there and there, here and there, behind you and in front of you and everywhere, flames flare up. If it is a subterranean fire, you cannot put it out. And those were the final words, one of the final words that Albert wrote. But at the moment of the hanging, just each of them got to say their last words. He said, the voice of the people, let the voice of the people be heard. And the famous words of August Spies were, which are at the base of the Haymarket Martyrs Monument, our silence will, the day will come when our silence will be greater than the voices you are throttling today. And so they went down to a very ugly death because they basically were strangled to death instead of snapping their necks by the way the state attached the rope. It was probably done to torture them as opposed to let them die as they should have, and this was witnessed by the 400 or so people, but not the family members, because the police and the state would not allow Lucy Parsons or Nita Van Zandt, the new wife of August Spies, to be with their husbands before they died the day of the hanging. And so there was this effort to degrade and to demoralize people who supported them, and the trial was done in that way. And you know, in so many ways, it's the way a government or a state will treat people who it treats as an enemy, and they were considered an enemy of the state. So this, of course, created a great deal of fear among the public, and it really did hurt the labor movement for a number of years. But on the other hand, the funeral procession was visited by hundreds of thousands of people, and it demonstrated that in fact they were martyrs because of the numbers of people that followed the horse and carriages as it moved through Milwaukee Avenue down Wicker Park into downtown Chicago into Grand Central Station at what we now see as Harrison and Wells, the train station there that went out to Forest Park, where the Forest Home Cemetery is, where the temporary vault was built to put their bodies. In 1893, when the monument was eventually dedicated, 8,000 people came to the cemetery. People from all around the world came. This is a tragedy of mass proportion because of the effort to crush the labor movement, but it's also an international solidifying moment in that world history never is the same. In 1889, at the Second International in Paris, France, where workers from around...
Let's take a moment here.
Okay.